Mama, why don't we have a daddy? The question every single mother dreads, and Stella Werrick had been lying to her 3-year-old twins for years. Because the truth was unspeakable. Their billionaire father didn't know they existed. His parents had threatened Stella into hiding when she refused to abort, then told their son she'd ended the pregnancy. Carl Berry lived in luxury, believing he'd dodged fatherhood until a news photo of Stella rescuing her daughters from a fire put his dimpled face on 2 toddlers who called another man's memory daddy. Now he was, standing at her door, and Stella had to decide. Protect her girls from the man who abandoned them, or give him the chance to become what he should have been all along? Carl Berry's mornings followed the same choreography they had for years. Alarm at 5:47 a.m., black coffee by 6:03, briefing documents spread across marble countertops by 6:15. His assistant had already flagged the day's priorities. Investor calls, a merger finalization, a keynote speech at the philanthropy gala. Everything polished. Everything controlled. Everything perfectly, suffocatingly empty. He scrolled through news alerts with the same detachment he applied to quarterly reports. Market fluctuations. Political posturing. Celebrity scandals that didn't concern him. And then one headline stopped his hand mid-swipe. Local hero. Single mother rescues toddlers from building fire. The photo loaded slowly, pixel by agonizing pixel. And Carl's heart forgot how to beat. Stella Werrick. His Stella. She stood in front of a smoke-damaged apartment building, soot streaking her cheekbone, her hair pulled back in that same messy twist she used to wear when she'd curl up beside him on Sunday mornings. But she wasn't alone. 2 little girls clung to her identical, with wild dark curls bouncing as they reached for her face. 3 years old, maybe exactly 3 years old. Carl's coffee mug slipped from his fingers. It shattered against the tile, black liquid spreading like an accusation. Because those girls, Natasha and Julia, the caption read, had dimples. His dimples, deep, unmistakable divots in their cheeks that he'd inherited from his grandmother, that no one else in his bloodline carried quite the same way. The room tilted, sound muffled. His lungs couldn't pull air. "Sir?" Weaver's voice crackled through the intercom. "Car's ready when you are. First meeting's at 8. Carl's throat closed around words that wouldn't come. He stared at the photo, zooming in on those 2 small faces, on Stella's protective arm wrapped around them, on the way her expression carried a weariness he'd never seen when they were together. 3 years ago, Stella had told him she was pregnant. 3 years ago, his parents sat him down in their estate's library and explained calmly, coldly, that he wasn't ready for fatherhood. That the merger with Castellano Industries required an unblemished image, that Stella was being taken care of. 3 years ago, his father delivered a single message. It's handled. She won't be keeping the child. Carl had been 26, terrified, drowning in family expectations and board pressures, and the weight of a legacy he never asked for. So he'd believe them. He'd let them handle it. He'd signed the documents they put in front of him, attended the engagement party they arranged with the Castellano heiress, and tried to forget the way Stella's hand had trembled when she whispered, "I'm scared, Carl. But we could do this together." Except she hadn't aborted. She'd disappeared. And she hadn't been alone. "Cancel everything," Carl rasped into the intercom. "Sir? Cancel everything." His voice cracked. "Get the car. Now." "Where are we going?" Carl's finger traced the outline of those 2 little girls on his phone screen. Children who should have been birthday parties and bedtime stories, and scraped knees he could have kissed better. Children who existed in a world he'd been shut out of. Children who didn't know his name. "Wherever Stella Werrick is," he whispered, "find her. Now." The community center parking lot was chaos, volunteers hauling donation boxes, displaced families clutching belongings, news vans circling like vultures. Carl's town car looked obscene here. All gleaming black paint and tinted windows among battered sedans and borrowed pickup trucks. He stepped out, and the October wind bit through his tailored suit. And there she was. Stella stood near a folding table, distributing blankets, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her jeans worn thin at the knees. She moved with the same quiet grace he remembered, but something had shifted. Her shoulders carried a weight they hadn't before. Her smile offered freely to the elderly woman thanking her didn't quite reach her eyes. Carl's feet wouldn't move. 3 years of guilt, of late-night what-ifs, of convincing himself he'd done the merciful thing. All of it collapsed into this single moment. Then he saw them. Natasha and Julia sat on a blanket near Stella's feet, coloring with broken crayons. One wore a yellow shirt with a sunflower, the other purple with butterflies. They whispered to each other in that secret twin language, heads bent close, and when one laughed, the other echoed it perfectly. His daughters, God, his daughters. Stella's head lifted. Her gaze swept the parking lot routine, careful, and then stopped. On him, every ounce of color drained from her face. Carl watched her body go rigid, watched her hands instinctively reach for the twins, pulling them closer. Watched 3 years of survival instinct snap into place as she stepped between him and the girls like a shield. He moved forward slowly, hands visible, heart hammering against his ribs. "Stella," he managed. His voice sounded like gravel. "Please, I need to. You shouldn't be here, Carl." Her words were quiet, but they carried the weight of every threat she'd endured. Every night she'd spent alone and terrified. "You need to leave." I saw the photo. He was close enough now to see the faint scar above her eyebrow new since he'd known her, close enough to hear the twins' crayon scratches pause. "In the news, I saw." "Stella, are they?" One of the girls peeked around Stella's leg. Wide brown eyes, his eyes studied him with cautious curiosity. "Mama," the child whispered. "Who's that?" Stella's jaw tightened. Her hand smoothed over the girl's curls, protective, automatic, practiced from 3 years of being everything these children needed. Carl's knees nearly buckled. "Are they mine?" The question came out broken, desperate. "Stella, please." "Are they mine?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Volunteers bustled around them. Car doors slammed. A child somewhere shrieked with laughter. But in the space between Carl and Stella, the world held its breath. Finally, Stella exhaled a sound that carried exhaustion and fury and grief all tangled together. "Yes," she whispered. "They're yours." Carl swayed. The parking lot blurred. Every board meeting, every gala, every carefully constructed piece of his hollow empire, all of it dissolved into static. Because standing 3 feet away were 2 little girls with his grandmother's dimples and Stella's storm gray eyes, and they were real, and they were alive, and he'd spent 3 years believing they never existed. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked. "Why didn't you?" "Oh, Carl." Stella's laugh was bitter, broken. "I tried. You have no idea what your family did." The second twin, braver than her sister, stepped fully into view now. She tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that felt uncomfortably familiar. "Are you sad?" she asked, pointing at the tears Carl didn't realize were falling. "Did you get hurt?" He dropped to his knees on the asphalt, not caring about the expensive suit or the curious stares from volunteers. His hands shook as he looked at these children, these strangers who were his blood, his legacy, his everything he'd been too much of a coward to fight for. "Yeah, sweetheart," he whispered, voice raw. "I got hurt. A long time ago, and I didn't even know it until right now." Stella's hand tightened on both girls' shoulders, pulling them back slightly. Her eyes glistened, but her spine was steel. "They told me to end them," she said quietly, each word a shard of glass. "Your parents. They threatened my job, my housing. They said you needed a perfect marriage for some merger. They gave me 2 choices, disappear or be destroyed." Carl's stomach turned to lead. "I didn't know. Stella, I swear to God, I didn't." "You believed them." Her voice didn't rise, but the accusation landed like a blow. "You signed whatever they put in front of you. You got engaged to someone else. You never looked for me." I thought. He couldn't finish, because what he thought didn't matter anymore. What he thought had cost him 3 years of bedtime stories and first words and birthday candles. The braver twin stepped closer, curiosity overcoming caution. "What's your name?" Carl looked up at Stella, silently begging permission. She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. "I'm Carl," he whispered, "and I'm so sorry I wasn't here." The girl considered this with the seriousness only a 3-year-old can muster. Then she patted his shoulder once, twice, a gesture of comfort she must have learned from watching her mother soothe others. "It's okay," she said softly. "Mama says sometimes people get lost, but they can find their way back." Stella made a sound, half sob, half laugh, and pressed her hand to her mouth. Carl looked up at the woman he'd loved and lost, at the children he'd abandoned without knowing, and felt the full weight of every choice he'd let someone else make for him. "Can I?" His voice broke. "Can I see them again? Please. I know I have no right, but—" Stella stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked down at Natasha and Julia, his daughters, their daughters, and something shifted behind her eyes. "Not for you," she said quietly. "For them. Because every child deserves to know where they came from. Even if," her voice wavered, "even if it's complicated." Carl nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "But if you disappear again," Stella continued, her tone hardening, "if you decide this is too messy, or too hard, or not worth your precious image, I will make sure they forget you ever existed. Do you understand me?" "I'm not leaving," Carl whispered, the words a vow. "Never again. I swear on everything I have, I'm not leaving." The girl still standing close, Julia, he thought, based on the butterfly shirt, tugged Stella's hand. "Mama, can he stay for snacks?" Mabel made cookies. Stella closed her eyes. When she opened them, they shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. "Yeah, baby," she murmured, "he can stay for snacks." And Carl Berry, billionaire, board chairman, man who'd closed deals worth more than small countries, sat on a donated blanket in a community center parking lot, eating slightly burnt cookies with two 3-year-olds, who didn't know he was their father yet. But maybe, if he fought hard enough this time, they would. You know that feeling? Don't you? When the truth you've been running from finally catches up, and suddenly everything you thought mattered just doesn't anymore. Some of you watching this have lived that moment, the instant when priorities rearrange themselves, and you realize what you should have been fighting for all along. If this story is stirring something in you, if you recognize that ache of lost time, or the courage it takes to start over, I hope you'll subscribe. This channel is for those of us who understand that life is messy, that second chances are hard-won, and that the most important battles are the ones we fight for the people we love. Hit that subscribe button if you're on this journey with us. The cookies were store-bought vanilla wafers, slightly stale, offered by Mabel with the kind of apologetic warmth only grandmotherly neighbors possess. Carl sat cross-legged on the donated blanket, watching Natasha carefully select each cookie before handing one to Julia, who immediately bit hers into a crescent moon shape. "You have to save the chocolate chips for last," Natasha explained to him seriously, though there were no chocolate chips. "That's the rule." Carl nodded, like she'd just disclosed classified information. "That's a very good rule." Julia studied him over her crescent cookie, her brown eyes, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Do you have a dog?" "No," Carl admitted. "I don't." "Why not?" I guess I never thought about it." Julia's expression suggested this was a grave character flaw. She turned to Stella. "Mama, he doesn't have a dog." Stella stood several feet away, arms crossed, watching the interaction with the vigilance of a woman who'd spent 3 years protecting these children from threats both real and imagined. Her jaw was tight, her eyes glistened. "Some people don't, baby," she said quietly. Mabel appeared again, this time with a thermos of coffee that smelled like chicory and better days. She glanced between Carl and Stella, read the tension radiating between them like heat shimmer, and made a decision only wise women make. "Girls," Mabel announced brightly, "I need help sorting the stuffed animals inside. Think you can handle that very important job?" Natasha and Julia scrambled up immediately, cookie crumbs dusting their shirts. "Can we keep one?" Julia asked hopefully. "We'll see," Mabel said, which every child knows means probably yes. She extended her hands. "Come on, my loves." The twins followed without hesitation, but Natasha paused, looking back at Carl with an expression that seemed far too knowing for 3 years old. "Don't make Mama cry," she said simply. Then she was gone, disappearing into the community center with her sister and Mabel. And Carl was alone with Stella for the first time in 3 years. The silence stretched between them like scar tissue necessary for healing, but painful to touch. Stella broke first. "You really didn't know." It wasn't a question this time, just a statement of something she was trying to make herself believe. "I didn't," Carl whispered. "Stella, I swear on everything I thought the pregnancy was handled." The word came out sharp. "That's what they told you, wasn't it? That I was handled?" Carl's stomach turned. "My father said." He stopped, the memory suddenly vivid. The library, the leather chairs, his father's calm, clinical tone. "It's handled. She won't be keeping the child. You can move forward now." "What did he say?" Stella pressed. "Tell me exactly what he said." "He told me you decided not to go through with it." Carl's voice cracked. "He said it was your choice, that you felt it was best for everyone. He made it sound like you'd come to that decision yourself." Stella laughed, but it was a broken sound. "My choice." She turned away, her shoulders shaking. "My choice was to keep them. My choice was to tell you. My choice was to believe we could figure it out together." "What happened?" Carl stood slowly, every muscle in his body aching with dread. "Stella, what did they do to you?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the community center doors where the twins had disappeared. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "Do you remember the clinic where I worked? The senior residential facility on Ashford Street?" Carl nodded, though she couldn't see him. "I loved that job. The residents loved me. I'd been there 2 years. And they were about to promote me to head nurse." Stella wrapped her arms around herself. "3 days after I told you I was pregnant, your parents showed up at my apartment." Flashback. The knock came at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. Stella opened the door, expecting her neighbor borrowing sugar, and instead found Richard and Margaret Berry standing in the dim hallway like tailored sentinels. "Miss Warwick," Richard said, his smile polished and empty. "May we come in?" Stella's hand tightened on the doorframe. "I don't think." It wasn't a request. Margaret stepped forward, forcing Stella to either block her physically or step aside. Stella stepped aside. They entered her tiny studio apartment, like auditors assessing a failing business. Margaret's gaze swept over the second-hand furniture, the medical textbooks stacked on the coffee table, the single photograph of Stella's late mother on the windowsill. "Quaint," Margaret murmured. Richard got straight to business. "You're pregnant with our son's child." "Yes," Stella lifted her chin. "And Carl and I are going to—" "Carl is 26 years old," Richard interrupted. "He has responsibilities you can't possibly understand. Castellano Industries is finalizing a merger that will secure his future, our family's legacy. A scandal right now would destroy everything." "A baby isn't a scandal," Stella said, but her voice wavered. Margaret smiled the way sharks smile. "It is when the mother is a clinic nurse with student loans and no family connections. It is when the tabloids write headlines about gold diggers trapping naive billionaires." She paused. "Do you know what happens to women who get those headlines, dear?" Stella said nothing. "They lose their jobs first," Margaret continued. "Then their housing, then their credibility. Nobody hires them. Nobody believes them. They disappear." "You're threatening me." Stella's hands instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. "We're offering you a choice," Richard corrected. "Terminate the pregnancy. We'll cover all medical expenses and provide you with $50,000. You can finish nursing school debt-free, move anywhere you'd like, start fresh. And if I refuse?" Richard's expression didn't change. "Dr. Pemberton at Ashford Senior Living is a personal friend. One phone call from me, and you'll be terminated for cause. Falsifying resident medication logs, perhaps, or inappropriate conduct. The details don't matter. The accusation alone will destroy your nursing license." Stella felt the walls closing in. "You can't do that. We can do anything we want, Miss Warwick. That's what power means." Margaret stepped closer. "You seem like a smart girl. Practical. So let's be practical. You keep this baby, you lose everything. Your job, your career, your reputation, and Carl?" She laughed softly. "Carl will believe whatever we tell him. He always does." "He loves me," Stella whispered. "He loves the idea of you," Richard said. "But love doesn't survive scandals and courtrooms and paternity battles. Love certainly doesn't survive when the Berry family attorneys get involved." He pulled a business card from his pocket. "You have 48 hours. Call this number when you've made the right decision." They left without another word. Stella stood frozen in her apartment, hands pressed against her stomach, and knew with terrible certainty that they meant every word. She tried calling Carl 17 times that night. He never answered. 2 days later, Dr. Pemberton called her into his office. "I'm sorry, Stella. We've had some concerns raised about your performance. We're going to have to let you go." She packed her apartment that week, maxed out her credit card for first and last month's rent in a neighborhood 3 hours away, changed her phone number, disappeared, and carried Carl's babies into a world that had tried to erase them before they were born. Carl's legs gave out. He sank onto the curb, his head in his hands, and made a sound that wasn't quite a sob but close. "They destroyed you," he whispered. "They threatened everything, and Stella, I just believed them. I didn't fight. I didn't question. I didn't even try to find you." "No," Stella agreed quietly. "You didn't. I'm sorry." The words were pathetically insufficient. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't give me back 3 years of struggling alone." Her voice hardened. "Sorry doesn't erase the nights Natasha couldn't breathe, and I had to choose between the emergency room bill and rent. Sorry doesn't change the fact that I raised your daughters with no help, no support, no anything except my own 2 hands, and the kindness of a neighbor." Carl looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. I know sorry isn't enough. But Stella, I didn't know. If I had known, would you have fought for us?" she challenged. "Really? Would you have stood up to your parents, risked your precious merger, chosen us over them?" He wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise that 26-year-old Carl would have been brave and righteous and strong. But he couldn't lie to her, not anymore. "I don't know," he admitted, the words ash in his mouth. "I want to believe I would have, but I was weak. I was scared. I let them control me." He stood slowly. "But I'm not that person anymore. I can't change what I didn't do then. But I'm here now. And I'm begging for a chance to know them, to be part of their lives, to do better." Stella stared at him, her expression unreadable. Through the community center window, they could see Natasha and Julia playing with stuffed animals, their laughter muffled but unmistakable. "They don't know you're their father," Stella said finally. "They think their daddy lives far away. That's what I told them when they started asking." "What do you want me to do?" Carl asked. "However you want to handle this, whatever timeline, whatever boundaries, I'll respect it. This is your call, Stella. They're your daughters." "Our daughters," she corrected, and something in Carl's chest cracked open. "And that's the only reason I'm even considering this. Not for you. For them. Because every child deserves to know where they come from. Even if it's messy and complicated and," her voice broke, "even if I'm terrified you'll break their hearts the way you broke mine." "I won't leave them," Carl said. "I swear to you. Don't make promises you can't keep." Stella turned to face him fully. "If you're serious about this, you'll prove it. Slowly, carefully, on my terms. You'll show up when I say you can. You'll leave when I ask you to. And the second I think you're going to hurt them, you'll cut me out completely," Carl finished. "I understand." Inside the community center, Julia pressed her face against the window, waving a purple elephant triumphantly. Carl lifted his hand in a small wave back, and his daughters giggled. "I'm not leaving again," he whispered, the vow meant for Stella but spoken to the universe. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm not leaving them." Stella closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were red but clear. "Okay," she said softly. "We'll try." There's something powerful about hearing the whole truth, isn't there? About understanding that sometimes good people make terrible choices because they're too afraid to stand up to the wrong voices. Some of you have been Stella betrayed by someone who should have protected you. Some of you have been Carl realizing too late that you let others write your story. If you're finding pieces of yourself in this, if you're thinking about your own battles with forgiveness or regret, leave a comment below. Tell us what part of this story hits closest to home. And if you haven't already, click that like button. It helps us reach other people who need to hear stories like these. Stories about real struggle, real healing, real second chances. Stella's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The elevator hadn't worked in 2 years, according to the handwritten sign taped to its doors, so Carl followed her upstairs, that creaked under worn linoleum. Natasha and Julia bounded ahead, their small feet creating an echoing rhythm that somehow sounded like home. "Careful on the landing," Stella called out automatically. "There's a loose board." The girls sidestepped it without looking, muscle memory from 3 years of navigating their world. Carl's chest tightened. The apartment door opened into a space no bigger than his master closet. The living room, kitchen, and dining area existed in a single open rectangle, partitioned only by a sagging sofa and a folding table with mismatched chairs. But it was clean. Painfully, meticulously clean, the kind of clean that comes from pride when pride is all you have left. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator in overlapping layers. A laundry basket sat folded in the corner, tiny clothes sorted into neat piles. The windowsill held 3 small plants in repurposed yogurt containers, their leaves reaching desperately toward sunlight. And on the kitchen counter, arranged like a small pharmacy, stood a row of medical supplies. Carl's eyes caught on the labels: albuterol inhaler, nebulizer solution, spacer chamber, emergency epinephrine. Natasha has asthma, Stella said quietly, following his gaze. Diagnosed at 18 months. The attacks come on fast, especially when the seasons change, or if she runs too hard. Natasha had already disappeared into the bedroom with Julia, their voices rising in some elaborate game involving stuffed animals and dramatic rescues. Does she? Carl's throat closed. How often does she need the nebulizer? Twice daily during good weeks. Every 4 hours during bad ones. Stella set her keys in a ceramic dish, shaped like a butterfly, chipped. Clearly handmade by small fingers. Last winter, we spent 3 nights in the ER. I didn't have insurance that covered specialists, so we waited in urgent care for 6 hours each time. Carl felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. Stella, don't. She held up a hand. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because if you're going to be part of their lives, you need to understand what their lives actually are. She moved to the refrigerator and pulled down a stack of drawings, handing them to Carl. The first few were typical preschool art stick figures, holding hands under yellow suns, houses with triangle roofs, flowers with oversized petals. But then the images shifted. Dark scribbles covering entire pages, black and purple storms, small figures huddled beneath shadowy masses. One showed 2 tiny people separated by jagged lines, reaching toward each other but unable to touch. Julia has night terrors, Stella said softly. 3, sometimes 4 times a week. She wakes up screaming about monsters and shadows and being alone in the dark. The pediatrician said it's developmental, that she'll grow out of it, but... Her voice cracked. She draws these during the day, like she's trying to make sense of the fear. Carl stared at the drawings, at his daughter's attempts to visualize what terrified her, and felt something break inside him. I missed this, he whispered. All of this. The diagnoses, the ER visits, the nightmares you faced, all of it alone. I had Mabel, Stella said, and right on cue, a knock sounded at the door. Mabel Turner entered like a force of nature contained in a 72-year-old body flower, dusting her cardigan, reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain, and a Tupperware container emitting the unmistakable scent of fresh banana bread. I heard little feet on the stairs and figured. She stopped when she saw Carl, her eyes narrowing with the protective sharpness only grandmotherly figures possess. Well, you must be the billionaire. Mabel, Stella said quickly. This is Carl. Carl, this is Mabel. She lives next door, and she's... I'm the person who sat with these babies when Stella worked double shifts, Mabel said, setting the banana bread on the counter with deliberate precision. I'm the person who walked the floor with Natasha during asthma attacks at 3 in the morning. I'm the person who held Julia after the nightmares when Stella was so exhausted she could barely stand. Mabel, Stella's cheeks flushed. It's all right, honey. He should know. Mabel turned her full attention to Carl, and he felt like a specimen under glass. Stella's been through hell, and she did it with more grace than most people manage on their best days. So if you're here to play daddy for a few weeks, and then disappear when it gets hard, you can see yourself out right now. Carl met her gaze steadily. I'm not going anywhere, ma'am. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. For them. Mabel studied him for a long moment, then gave a single sharp nod. We'll see. She turned to Stella. I'll take the girls for an hour. If you need to talk. Thank you, Stella murmured. Mabel called the twins, who emerged reluctantly, each clutching a stuffed animal. Natasha paused in front of Carl, her expression serious. Hi, she said simply. Hi. Carl managed around the lump in his throat. Julia stayed behind Stella's leg, peeking out with wide eyes but saying nothing. And then they were gone, Mabel's voice echoing in the stairwell as she promised the girls they could help her bake cookies. The silence in the apartment felt massive. Stella sank onto the sofa, exhaustion written in every line of her body. Carl remained standing, afraid to presume. You can sit, she said finally. He sat on the edge of the cushion, leaving space between them. The past 3 years, Stella began, her voice hollow. I worked at Riverside Care Facility. Night shifts mostly, because they paid more, and Mabel could watch the girls while they slept. I'd come home at 7 in the morning, get 3 hours of sleep, wake up to take them to the free preschool program at the community center, then try to sleep again before my next shift. She laughed, but it held no humor. I don't think I've slept more than 4 consecutive hours since they were born. Carl looked at the apartment with new eyes. The wall near the kitchen table was covered in papers, bills, mostly. Medical invoices stamped, past, due, in red ink. Collection notices, payment plan agreements. How much do you owe? He asked quietly. Don't. Stella's voice sharpened. Don't you dare try to write a check and make this disappear. I didn't tell you this so you'd swoop in with your money and fix everything. I told you so you'd understand what it costs to raise them, what I've been willing to sacrifice. I know. Do you? She turned to face him fully. Do you know what it's like to stand in a pharmacy at midnight, trying to decide if you can afford both the asthma medication and groceries? Do you know what it feels like to hold your daughter while she can't breathe, and pray the inhaler works because you can't afford another ER bill? No, Carl said honestly. I don't, but I want to. I want to understand. I want to be here for the hard parts, not just the easy moments. Stella's eyes glistened. I was so angry at you. For years, I was furious. But the worst part? Her voice dropped to a whisper. I never hated you. I hated your parents. I hated the system that let them threaten me. I hated how powerless I felt. But you? She shook her head. I just felt sad. Because the Carl I loved would have fought for us. And I had to accept that maybe I never really knew you at all. You did know me, Carl said urgently. The man you loved, he was real, but he was weak. He let other people make his choices because it was easier than standing up to them. He leaned forward. I can't give you back 3 years. I can't undo the nights you spent alone and terrified. But I can promise you this. I will show up. Every single time. I will be consistent. I will be transparent. And I will never, ever let anyone hurt you or those girls again. Words are easy, Carl. Then let me prove it with actions. He gestured around the apartment. Tell me what they need. Not money. I know you don't want that. But time. Presence. Do they like parks? Story time? What makes Natasha laugh? What helps Julia feel safe after nightmares? Stella stared at him, something shifting behind her eyes. Natasha loves butterflies, she said slowly. She collects pictures of them from magazines. And Julia, she feels safe when someone sits with her until she falls asleep. She needs to know she's not alone. Carl nodded, committing every word to memory. Butterflies, staying until she sleeps. What else? And for the first time since he'd found her, Stella's shoulders relaxed just slightly. Maybe, just maybe, he meant it this time. Carl started showing up at Stella's apartment at 6:30 p.m. on weeknights, not in tailored suits anymore, but in jeans and sweaters that had seen better days. He'd bring groceries he'd accidentally bought too much of, and pretend not to notice when Stella's refrigerator was nearly empty. 2 weeks later, the Saturday farmers market sprawled across 3 blocks of downtown, a riot of canvas tents, hand-painted signs, and the competing scents of kettle corn and fresh bread. Carl arrived early, as instructed, finding Stella and the twins near the community bulletin board, where local artists sold watercolors of the harbor. Natasha wore her yellow sunflower shirt again, apparently her favorite, and Julia had chosen purple overalls with a butterfly patch on the pocket. They stood close to Stella, eyeing Carl with the cautious curiosity of children still learning whether to trust this tall stranger who kept appearing in their lives. You came, Stella said, and Carl couldn't tell if she sounded surprised or disappointed. I said I would. He crouched down to the twins' level. Hi, Natasha. Hi, Julia. Natasha offered a small wave. Julia ducked behind her sister. They're still getting used to you, Stella said quietly. Don't take it personally. But Carl did take it personally, in the way that every missed moment, every absent birthday, every bedtime story he'd never read, carved itself deeper into his chest. What do you girls like to do at the market? He asked gently. Natasha considered this seriously. We look at the puppies, and the balloons, and Mama gets us apple slices. Can we do all those things today? Both girls looked to Stella for permission. She nodded, though her jaw remained tight. They started with the puppy rescue booth, where adoptable dogs lounged in portable pens while volunteers handed out information sheets. Julia pressed her face against the chain link, cooing at a small terrier mix, who wagged its entire body in response. "Can we get a dog, Mama?" Natasha asked a question. Stella's expression suggested she'd heard 1,000 times. "Maybe when we have a bigger place, baby." Carl opened his mouth, then closed it. Every instinct screamed to say, "I could help with that," but he heard Stella's earlier warning. "Don't you dare try to write a check and make this disappear." So instead, he said, "That one looks like it has a lot of personality." "She does," the volunteer chimed in. "That's Rosie. She's 3 years old. Great with kids." "We're just looking today," Stella interjected firmly, already steering the girls away before hope could take root. They moved through the market slowly. Carl carried the reusable shopping bags, while Stella selected vegetables with the practiced eye of someone who knew exactly how far each dollar needed to stretch. A vendor offered free apple slices, and Natasha carefully took 2, one for herself, one for Julia. "Do you want one?" Natasha asked Carl, extending a slightly sticky slice. His throat closed. "Thank you. That's very kind." She smiled, small, tentative, but real, and those dimples appeared like gifts. They passed a face painting booth where a teenage artist offered her services for $5. Julia stopped, transfixed by a girl walking past with a glittery rainbow painted across her cheek. "Mama, can we?" "Not today, baby. Maybe next time." Carl saw the way Julia's face fell, the practiced disappointment of a child used to hearing "maybe next time." Before he could think better of it, he said, "I could. Would it be okay if I got them face painted? My treat?" Stella's expression hardened. "Carl, please, not as not trying to buy anything. Just let me do this one thing." She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine. But nothing expensive. Simple designs only." The girls vibrated with excitement as they climbed into the folding chairs. Natasha requested a butterfly, of course she did. Julia wanted a purple flower. "Can you do those?" Carl asked the artist. "Absolutely. You want one too, Dad?" The word hit him like a physical blow. Dad. He wasn't their dad yet. He was just Carl, the man trying to earn a title he'd forfeited before he even knew it existed. "He's not," Stella started. "Sure," Carl interrupted, his voice rough. "Give me a butterfly too, to match." The teenage artist grinned and got to work. 10 minutes later, Natasha had delicate blue wings spanning her cheek. Julia wore a purple bloom across her forehead, and Carl sported a somewhat lopsided butterfly on his jaw that made both girls giggle. "It's crooked," Natasha announced. "I think it's perfect," Carl said, and meant it. Stella watched from a few feet away, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Resentment lingered in the tight set of her shoulders. 3 years of struggle couldn't dissolve after one face painting session. But something else flickered there too. Longing, maybe. Or the dangerous beginning of hope. They continued through the market. Carl bought matching butterfly balloons, bright yellow ones that bobbed above the girls' heads like small suns. When Natasha struggled to hold hers and her apple slice simultaneously, Carl crouched down. "Want to ride on my shoulders? You can hold the balloon better from up there." Natasha looked to Stella. Another permission check. "If you want to, baby, be careful." Carl lifted her carefully, settling her small weight on his shoulders. Her legs dangled by his chest, her free hand gripping his hair for balance. The world shifted suddenly. He was taller, stronger, more important. He was carrying his daughter. Julia watched with obvious envy. "Your turn next," Carl promised. "We can take turns." They walked like that through the crowded marketplace. Carl with Natasha on his shoulders, Julia holding Stella's hand but glancing up at her sister with periodic jealousy. Vendors called out specials. Musicians played folk songs on corners. Families wove between stalls, and for a few precious moments, they looked like one of them. Then, Natasha spotted a flower vendor across the way. "Butterflies!" she shrieked, pointing at monarch butterflies hovering around the wildflower display. "Real ones." She squirmed, and Carl carefully lowered her. "Let's go look." But Natasha was already running, her yellow balloon trailing behind her, disappearing into the thick crowd of Saturday shoppers. "Natasha," Stella called. "Stop." But the crowd swallowed her. Carl's heart stopped. 1 second she was there, small, bright, his, and the next she'd vanished into a sea of legs and strollers and shopping bags. "Natasha." He lunged forward. pushing through the crowd. "Natasha, stop!" Behind him, Stella clutched Julia and followed, her voice rising with the panic every parent knows. "Natasha Marie Warwick, you stop right now." But there were too many people, too many stalls, too many places a 3-year-old could disappear. Carl's vision tunneled. His breath came in sharp gasps. He shoved past shoppers, ignoring their protests, scanning frantically for yellow shirt, yellow balloon, anything. "Has anyone seen a little girl?" he shouted. 3 years old, dark curls, yellow shirt with a sunflower. People stared. Some shook their heads. Others hadn't even heard him. Terror he'd never experienced before clawed up his throat. This was his daughter, his blood, his responsibility, his fault for not holding her hand tighter, and she was gone. "Natasha," his voice cracked. "Baby, where are you?" He tore through vendor stalls, overturning displays, not caring about the damage or the angry shouts following him. Nothing mattered except finding her. Nothing. Then he heard a small, hiccuping sob coming from beneath a table selling handmade pottery. Carl dropped to his knees and looked under the tablecloth. Natasha huddled there, knees pulled to her chest, her yellow balloon string wrapped around her wrist. Tears streaked her face. Her butterfly face paint had smudged from rubbing her eyes. "Natasha," Carl breathed. "I got lost," she whispered. "I couldn't find you." Carl crawled under the table, not caring about the dirt or the confused vendor or anything except getting to her. He pulled her into his arms, and she clung to him, tiny hands fisting in his shirt, her face pressed against his chest. "I've got you," he choked out. "You're safe. I've got you." "I thought you'd leave," Natasha sobbed into his shirt. "Like other people." The words shattered something fundamental inside him. "No," he whispered fiercely, holding her tighter. "No, baby. I'm not leaving. I'm never leaving. I promise. I promise." He was crying full, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. 3 years of absence, 3 years of missed moments, 3 years of not knowing they existed. All of it crashed over him as this tiny girl trembled in his arms. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here before. But I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. Ever." Natasha's sobs quieted gradually. Her grip loosened slightly, but she didn't let go. "Promise?" she whispered. "I promise." Stella found them like that, Carl on his knees beneath a pottery vendor's table, holding Natasha like she was the only thing anchoring him to earth. Julia clutched Stella's leg, wide-eyed and scared. Stella's expression crumbled. She'd spent 3 years protecting these girls from disappointment, from men who made promises they couldn't keep, from hoping for things that would never come. She'd built walls around their little family, because walls were safer than trust. But watching Carl sob, 101st, continuing the complete script, into Natasha's hair, watching him hold their daughter like losing her, had broken something fundamental inside him. Something shifted. Maybe he really meant it this time. Maybe he really wasn't leaving. "Is everyone okay?" the vendor asked nervously. "Yes," Stella managed. "Thank you. We're okay." Carl finally emerged from under the table, Natasha still in his arms. His face was streaked with tears. His carefully pressed shirt was wrinkled and dirty. His crooked butterfly face paint had smeared. He looked like a disaster. He looked like a father. "I'm sorry," he said to Stella. "I should have held her hand. I should have." "She's fast," Stella interrupted quietly. "And 3, it happens." Their eyes met over Natasha's head, and something unspoken passed between them. Julia tugged Stella's hand. "Can I hug Natasha too?" "Of course, baby." Julia wrapped her arms around her sister, and Natasha reached for her, creating a tangle of small limbs and matching balloons. Carl looked at Stella. "I meant what I said. I'm not leaving." And for the first time since he'd reappeared in her life, Stella thought she might actually believe him. Moments like these, when fear strips away everything except what truly matters, they change us, don't they? Some of you know exactly what that panic feels like. The moment you lose sight of your child in a crowd, the terror that grips your heart, the vow you make when you find them safe again. That's what this channel is about. Real emotions, real struggles, the messy, terrifying, beautiful work of showing up for the people we love. If this story is resonating with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Click that share button, because these stories matter, your stories matter. And sometimes we all need to be reminded that it's never too late to become who we should have been all along. The Barry estate sat on 12 acres of manicured perfection hedges, trimmed with geometric precision, fountains that cost more than most houses, wrought iron gates that whispered exclusivity with every creak. Carl had grown up here, learned to walk on these marble floors, inherited expectations from these walls. He'd always hated it. The gate guard recognized the town car immediately, and waved them through without question. Weaver glanced in the rearview mirror, concern etched in the lines around his eyes. "Sir, are you sure about this?" Carl's jaw was set so tight it ached. His phone sat in his breast pocket, recording app already activated. "I should have done this 3 years ago." The front door opened. Before he reached it, his mother's doing, no doubt. She'd always had an uncanny ability to sense when her carefully constructed world faced disruption. Margaret Barry stood in the foyer wearing pearls and a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Stella's monthly rent. Her smile was practiced, empty. The same one she deployed at charity galas and board meetings. "Carl, darling, what a lovely surprise. We weren't expecting." "Where's father?" Carl's voice came out flat, controlled, dangerous. Margaret's smile faltered slightly. "He's in his study." "Carl, if this is about that unfortunate news article, get him, now." Something in his tone made her hesitate, for perhaps the first time in his life. Carl saw uncertainty flicker across his mother's face. She turned without another word and disappeared down the hallway. Carl stood in the foyer where he'd posed for countless family portraits, where they'd hosted fundraisers for causes they didn't care about, where everything had always been about image and legacy and power. The chandelier overhead cost 6 figures. The painting on the wall was an original Monet. None of it mattered. His father emerged from the study with Margaret trailing behind Richard Barry in his custom suit, reading glasses perched on his nose, carrying the air of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Carl, your mother said this was urgent." He glanced at his watch. "I have a conference call in 20 minutes, so, if you could." "You threatened Stella." Carl's words cut through the air like glass. 3 years ago, you went to her apartment and threatened her job, her reputation, her entire life if she didn't disappear. The silence stretched. Margaret's hand went to her pearls, an unconscious tell she'd never learned to control. Richard's expression didn't change. "I don't know what stories this woman has been telling you." "Don't." Carl took a step forward. "Don't you dare lie to me. Not anymore. I want the truth. All of it." "Carl, sweetheart, you're upset." Margaret moved toward him, hand extended in a gesture meant to soothe. "That girl has obviously manipulated you. Women like that, they see an opportunity. And, women like what?" Carl's voice rose. "Single mothers, nurses, people who actually work for a living instead of living off family money they didn't earn? That's uncalled for," Richard said sharply. "We are your parents. We acted in your best interest." "My best interest?" Carl laughed, and it sounded broken even to his own ears. "You destroyed the woman I loved. You threatened her into hiding. You made me believe she'd aborted my children when she was out there raising them alone, terrified, struggling to survive. We saved you from a catastrophic mistake," Richard interrupted. "You were 26 years old, barely finished graduate school. That girl would have trapped you with a baby, derailed your entire future. She didn't trap me. She loved me." Carl's hands shook. "And I loved her. But you couldn't allow that, could you? Because she wasn't the right family, the right connections, the right image for your precious merger." Margaret and Richard exchanged a glance, that silent communication of couples who'd spent decades presenting a united front. "The Castellano merger was important," Margaret said carefully. "For the company. For your future." "The merger that failed 6 months later?" Carl shot back. "That merger? The one that fell apart anyway, making all your manipulation pointless?" Richard's jaw tightened. "We couldn't have predicted." "You told me she had an abortion," Carl's voice cracked. "You looked me in the eye and told me it was handled, that she'd chosen not to keep the baby. You made me believe I'd dodged a bullet, when you'd actually just destroyed 3 lives." "We protected you," Margaret insisted. "Carl, you have to understand. I have 2 daughters." The words came out raw. "Natasha and Julia. They're 3 years old. They have my dimples and Stella's eyes, and they've lived their entire lives without knowing I existed, because you decided my image mattered more than their existence." Margaret went pale. Richard's expression finally cracked just slightly, but enough. You didn't tell him. Carl turned to his father. She tried to reach me, didn't she? After you threatened her, she tried to tell me what you'd done. Any correspondence from that woman was intercepted for your own good, Richard said stiffly. We couldn't allow her to. Intercepted. Carl's laugh was bitter. You hid her letters. How many? How many times did she try to reach me? Silence. How many? Carl roared. 7, Margaret whispered. She wrote 7 letters. We destroyed them. The room spun. Carl gripped the edge of a console table to steady himself. She tried 7 times to tell me about my daughters, and you destroyed every attempt. He looked at his parents, these people who'd raised him, shaped him, controlled him, and felt something fundamental break. Do you have any idea what you've done? What you've cost me? We gave you an empire, Richard said coldly. A legacy worth billions. Opportunities most people can only dream of. And you want to throw it away for some woman and her children. My children, Carl shouted. They're my children, my daughters, and you erase them like they were a PR problem to be managed. They were, Margaret said, and the casual cruelty in her tone made Carl's stomach turn. Carl, please try to understand. We've built something extraordinary. The Barry name means something in this city. We couldn't allow a scandal, Carl finished. You couldn't allow a scandal. But, you know what? You created one anyway. Because the truth is out now. I know about Natasha and Julia. I know what you did, and I will never forgive you for it. Don't be dramatic, Richard said dismissively. You're angry now, but you'll calm down. You'll see we acted in your best interest. In a few weeks, I'll have filed paperwork to remove myself from every Barry Company board. Carl's voice was steel. I'm done. With the empire, with the legacy. With you. Margaret gasped. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. Carl pulled out his phone, stopped the recording, and held it up. And I have your full confession. Every threat you made, every lie you told, every letter you destroyed, all of it recorded. Richard's face went crimson. You recorded us? In our own home? Yes, because I knew you'd never tell the truth otherwise. You'd gaslight me, manipulate me, make me doubt what I know to be real. Just like you've done my entire life. Carl pocketed the phone. But I'm done being controlled. I'm done letting you make my choices. I'm done sacrificing what matters for what looks good. If you walk away from this family, you walk away from everything, Richard warned. The money, the connections, the name. You'll have nothing. I'll have my daughters. Carl's voice was quiet, but certain. I'll have a chance to know them, to be their father, to build something real, instead of this hollow performance you call a legacy. And that's worth more than everything you've ever given me. He turned toward the door. Carl, wait. Margaret's voice cracked. Please, we're your parents. We love you. No. Carl stopped but didn't turn around. You love the idea of me. The version that does what you say, marries who you choose, lives the life you designed. But that person doesn't exist anymore. And he's not coming back. You'll regret this, Richard said coldly. When reality hits, and you realize what you've thrown away. The only thing I regret, Carl said, is not doing this 3 years ago. He walked out of the Barry estate for the last time. The gates closed behind him with a finality that should have felt terrifying. Instead, it felt like freedom. Stella's apartment building looked different in the evening light, softer somehow, more welcoming than the Barry estate had ever been. Carl climbed the 3 flights of stairs, his legs heavy, his heart heavier. He knocked. Stella opened the door, still in her work scrubs, surprise flickering across her face. Carl, I wasn't expecting. I confronted them. The words tumbled out. My parents. I recorded everything. They admitted it. All the threats. The letters. Everything. And I walked away. From the company. From the family, from all of it. Stella stared at him. You, what? I have nothing now, Carl said quietly. No trust fund. No board positions. No Barry empire. Just, his voice cracked. Just a chance, if you'll give me one, to know Natasha and Julia, to be their father, to prove I meant what I said. Behind Stella, Mabel appeared, the twins flanking her in matching pajamas. Daddy Carl, Natasha called the first time she'd used any version of that word, and Carl's knees nearly buckled. Stella's eyes glistened. She looked at Carl, really looked at him, and saw not a billionaire, or a Barry, or an obligation. Just a man who'd finally chosen right. "Come in," she whispered. "Come meet your daughters." And Carl Barry, who'd once had everything and understood nothing, stepped across the threshold into the only empire that had ever mattered. Standing up to the people who raised you, choosing your own path, over their expectations, that takes a kind of courage most people never find. How many of us have sacrificed our own happiness because we were afraid to disappoint someone else? How many chances have we let slip away because standing up felt too hard? If Carl's choice is stirring something in you, if you're thinking about your own crossroads moment, drop a comment below. What would you choose if you knew you couldn't fail? What's the conversation you've been too afraid to have? This community is here for you. And if you're finding strength in these stories, hit that like button and subscribe. You're not alone in this journey. The headline appeared Tuesday morning on every tabloid website and social media feed in the city. Billionaire's secret twins, Carl Barry's hidden children surface, after 3-year cover-up. Below it, grainy photos, Carl leaving Stella's apartment building, Carl at the farmer's market, with 2 small girls on his shoulders, Carl and Stella standing close while the twins played nearby. Someone had been following them. Watching. Waiting. Stella's phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. Unknown numbers. Text messages from former coworkers she hadn't spoken to in years. Neighbors knocking to see if everything's okay. By 7:15, the first news van pulled up outside her building. By 7:30, there were 4. Stella stood at her window, coffee cup trembling in her hands, watching reporters set up cameras on the sidewalk. A woman in a red blazer practiced her intro, gesturing toward the building like it was the scene of a crime. The twins were still asleep, thank God, but they'd wake soon, and what then? How do you explain to 3-year-olds why strangers with cameras want to take their picture? Her phone rang again, this time a number she recognized. "Don't go outside," Carl said before she could even speak. "Don't open the door. Don't engage with anyone. I'm 15 minutes away." "Carl, they're everywhere." "I know, I saw the article. My team tried to contain it, but," he exhaled sharply, "just hold tight, I'm coming." Stella ended the call as Natasha padded into the living room, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama, why are there people outside?" Through the window, a cameraman zoomed in on their floor. Stella yanked the curtains closed. "Just some confused people, baby. Go wake your sister. We're having pancakes for breakfast. The good kind with chocolate chips? The very best kind." By the time Carl arrived, 6 news vans lined the street, and a crowd of curious neighbors had gathered. He emerged from the town car wearing yesterday's shirt and a baseball cap pulled low, but it didn't matter. The moment his foot hit the sidewalk, the reporters surged forward. "Mr. Barry, is it true you have secret children? Did you know about the twins 3 years ago? Are you in a relationship with Miss Warwick? Is this why you left the Barry Empire?" Carl kept his head down, moving toward the building entrance, with Weaver flanking him. A reporter stepped directly into his path, microphone extended like a weapon. "Mr. Barry, the public deserves to know, were these children hidden to protect your family's reputation?" Carl stopped. For a moment, Stella, watching from the window, thought he might actually answer. But then he simply said, "Excuse me," and continued inside. The buzzer rang 30 seconds later. Stella opened the door to find Carl breathing hard, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury. Behind him, she could hear reporters shouting questions in the stairwell before the building door closed and muffled their voices. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I'm so sorry. I should have anticipated this. Should have prepared you." "Daddy Carl." Natasha appeared, chocolate smeared on her cheek, arms outstretched. Carl's expression crumbled. He dropped to his knees and pulled her into a hug. Then Julia, who'd followed her sister. "Hi, babies. I'm so glad to see you." "Why are those people yelling?" Julia asked. "They're just..." Carl glanced at Stella, searching for the right words. "They're confused about some things, but it's going to be okay." Stella doubted that. Through the closed curtains, she could see camera flashes going off in rapid succession. Carl's phone buzzed incessantly. Text after text, call after call. Finally, he silenced it and looked at Stella with an expression she couldn't quite read. I need to make a statement, he said quietly. A formal one. Press conference. Absolutely not. Stella's voice was sharp. That will just make it worse. Feed into they're not going to stop, Stella. Not until they get a story. And right now, they're writing whatever narrative they want, that I hid the twins, that you trapped me, that this is some scandal that needs exposing. His hands clenched. But if I control the narrative, if I tell the truth publicly, maybe we can end this on our terms. Our terms? Stella laughed bitterly. Carl, there are no our terms with the media. They'll tear you apart. They'll twist whatever you say. Then they twist it. But at least they'll have heard the truth first. He stood slowly, the twins still clinging to his legs. I won't let them write lies about you. About us. About Natasha and Julia. Stella saw the determination in his eyes, the same fierce protectiveness he'd shown when Natasha went missing at the market. And beneath it, something else. Courage. Maybe. Or desperation to do right by them after so many wrongs. What would you even say? She whispered. The truth, all of it. The press conference was scheduled for 2 o'clock at a hotel conference room downtown. Carl's publicist, a sharp woman named Diane who'd worked damage control for the Barry family for years, objected strenuously to everything about the plan. You don't bring children to a press conference about a scandal, she argued over speakerphone. You certainly don't introduce them. This is PR suicide. Then I commit suicide, Carl said calmly. But I'm not hiding them. Not anymore. Carl, think about what you're doing. I am thinking. For the first time in my life, I'm thinking clearly. He ended the call. Stella watched him pace the small apartment, rehearsing what he'd say, discarding words that felt too political or too defensive. The twins played with blocks on the floor, oblivious to the chaos outside. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. We could wait, let it die down. It won't die down, and every day, they write stories without our input. Every day, Natasha and Julia are called secret children, like there's something to be ashamed of. His voice cracked. I won't allow it. Mabel arrived at 12:30 to watch the twins. She hugged Stella tight and whispered, That man is fighting for you. Whatever happens, remember that. The hotel conference room was packed. Reporters from every major outlet, cameras positioned at angles to catch every micro-expression, recorders placed on the podium like offerings. The air buzzed with anticipation, blood in the water, a story ready to write itself. Carl walked to the podium alone. No publicist, no lawyer, just him and a prepared statement he'd handwritten that morning. Stella stood in the back of the room, arms wrapped around herself, watching this man she'd once loved, still loved, if she was honest, walk into the fire for her. Thank you all for coming, Carl began, his voice steady despite the tremor Stella could see in his hands. I'm here to address the story that broke this morning regarding my daughters, Natasha and Julia Warwick. The camera shutters clicked like insects. 3 years ago, Stella Warwick told me she was pregnant. I was 26, terrified, and drowning in family expectations I didn't know how to resist. My parents intervened. They threatened Stella, threatened her job, her reputation, her entire life, and forced her to disappear. They told me she terminated the pregnancy. I believed them. I was weak enough and cowardly enough to believe them without question, and that is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A reporter's hand shot up, but Carl continued. Stella raised our daughters alone for 3 years. Through asthma attacks and night terrors and bills she could barely pay and fear she shouldn't have had to endure. She did it with grace and strength and love that I cannot begin to comprehend. She is not a scandal. She is not a secret. She is the woman I loved, the woman I failed, and the mother of my children. Stella's eyes burned. She pressed a hand to her mouth. I learned about Natasha and Julia 2 weeks ago, when I saw Stella's photo in a news article. Since then, I've been trying desperately, imperfectly, to be present in their lives, to earn the right to be called their father, to prove that I am not the man who abandoned them, even if I didn't know they existed. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. My daughters are not hidden. They are not secrets. They are the blessings of my life. They are smart, and funny, and brave. And they deserve better than to be reduced to tabloid headlines. So I'm asking, begging, that you give them privacy. Write whatever you want about me. I can take it. But leave Natasha and Julia out of your stories. They're 3 years old. They didn't ask for any of this. A reporter called out, "Are you in a relationship with Miss Warwick?" Carl's eyes found Stella across the room. "I'm trying to earn her forgiveness. That's all I can say right now." "Do you regret walking away from the Barry Empire?" "Not for a single second." "What about your parents? Will you reconcile?" "No. What they did was unforgivable. I choose my daughters and their mother over legacy, over money, over everything." The questions came faster, sharper, but Carl's answers remained steady. He didn't deflect, didn't spin, just told the truth with a rawness that seemed to catch even the most cynical reporters off guard. Finally, he stepped away from the podium. "That's all I have to say. Thank you." The room erupted with follow-up questions, but Carl was already moving toward the exit, toward Stella, his eyes never leaving hers. In the car back to her apartment, Stella sat in stunned silence. "I know that was a lot," Carl said quietly. "If I made things worse, you called them blessings." Her voice broke. "In front of everyone, you called our daughters blessings. Because they are." Stella turned to look at him, really look at him, this man who'd faced a room full of judgment and chose vulnerability, who'd sacrificed reputation for truth, who'd defended them with a fierceness that made her heart ache. "For 3 years, I convinced myself you were weak," she whispered, "that you'd never fight for us. I was weak, but I'm trying not to be anymore. I can see that." Stella's hand moved toward his, then hesitated. "Carl, Her phone buzzed. A notification, then another. Social media exploding with clips from the press conference. But as she scrolled, something unexpected emerged. The comments weren't cruel. This man just owned everything. Respect. The way he talked about his daughters. "I'm crying." Finally, a billionaire who admits he was wrong. The narrative was shifting. Not completely, there would always be cynics and critics, but enough. Enough that maybe, just maybe, Natasha and Julia could grow up without this defining them. Stella looked at Carl and felt something crack open in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet. That would take time. But hope. Fragile, terrifying, beautiful hope. "Thank you," she whispered, "for protecting them, for protecting us." Carl's eyes glistened. "Always. I promise you, Stella, always." Truth has a power that spin and lies can never match. When someone stands in front of the world and says, "I was wrong, I failed, but I'm trying to do better," that takes more strength than any amount of money or status could ever buy. If you've ever had to choose between protecting your image and protecting the people you love, you know how rare that kind of courage is. And if you're watching this story unfold and finding yourself moved by Carl's transformation, that says something about you too. It says you believe people can change, that second chances matter. That love is worth fighting for. If that's you, we'd love to have you in this community. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this story with someone who needs to believe in redemption. And leave a comment telling us, have you ever had to choose between what looked good and what was right? We're listening. Carl started showing up at 6 to 30 p.m. on weeknights, not in tailored suits anymore, but in jeans and sweaters that had seen better days. He'd bring groceries he'd accidentally bought too much of, and pretend not to notice when Stella's refrigerator was nearly empty. He never pushed, never presumed. Just asked quietly, "Can I stay for dinner?" And Stella, despite every instinct screaming to protect herself, always said yes. Because the twins lit up when he walked through the door. Because Natasha would run to him shouting, "Daddy Carl," and Julia would shyly present whatever drawing she'd made that day. Because watching him crouch down to their level, listening to their 3-year-old logic with complete seriousness, made something ache in Stella's chest. Tonight, Julia had insisted on showing him her very important butterfly collection. Magazine clippings taped haphazardly to construction paper with enough glue to seal an envelope permanently. "This one's a monarch," Julia explained, with the confidence of someone who'd watched exactly one nature documentary. "They go to Mexico." "That's a long way," Carl said solemnly. "Do they get tired?" "Probably. But they keep going anyway, 'cause that's what butterflies do." Carl glanced at Stella over Julia's head, and something passed between them, an understanding that maybe they were all a little like those butterflies, exhausted but still moving towards something better. After dinner spaghetti that Natasha insisted on twirling like Daddy does, came the carefully choreographed chaos of bedtime. Stella had warned Carl it wasn't pretty. The twins resisted pajamas, Like prisoners resisting handcuffs, negotiations over toothbrushing rivaled international treaties, and the bedtime routine could stretch into an hour-long production. But Carl stayed. "Can Daddy Carl read the story tonight?" Natasha asked, clutching her worn copy of The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Stella hesitated. Bedtime stories were sacred, her time with the girls, the moment when the day's struggles dissolved into whispered voices and warm blankets. Sharing it felt like opening a door she'd kept locked for 3 years. "If Mama says it's okay," Carl said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. Stella nodded, not trusting her voice. They settled onto the girls' shared bed, Natasha on Carl's left, Julia on his right, both in matching butterfly pajamas that Mabel had sewn by hand. Carl opened the book with hands that trembled slightly, and began to read. His voice was different than Stella expected, gentle, unhurried, pausing to let the twins point at pictures and shout out which foods they'd eat if they were caterpillars. When he reached the part where the caterpillar builds his cocoon, Julia pressed closer against his side. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. "When he changes?" Carl thought about this seriously. "I don't think so, sweetheart. I think sometimes we have to wrap ourselves up tight to become who we're meant to be. And when we come out, we're stronger, more beautiful." Stella's throat closed. She stood in the doorway, watching this man read to their daughters, and realized with startling clarity that he wasn't just reading about transformation, he was living it. After stories came Natasha's breathing treatment. The nebulizer sat on the nightstand like a familiar enemy, necessary but despised. Natasha's face fell when Stella brought it over. "I don't wanna," she whimpered. "It tastes yucky." "I know, baby. But it helps you breathe better." Stella had given this speech hundreds of times, her heart breaking every single time. "Can I help?" Carl asked quietly. Stella showed him how to measure the medication, attach the mask, turn on the machine that made its familiar whirring sound. Natasha crossed her arms, her expression mutinous. "Tell you what," Carl said, sitting beside her. "I'll do it with you. We'll breathe together, in and out. Can you count how many breaths we take?" Natasha's resistance softened slightly. "How many do you think?" "I bet we can do at least 50. Maybe more. You're very strong." She straightened a little, pride overriding complaint. Carl held the mask gently to her face, and together they breathed in and out, while Carl counted softly and made silly faces that had Natasha giggling despite the medicine's bitter taste. Stella watched from the doorway and felt something crack inside her. He'd only known about the asthma for 2 weeks, but he was already memorizing dosages, learning techniques, making it easier somehow. When Natasha's treatment finished, Carl tucked both girls in with a tenderness that seemed impossibly natural for someone who'd missed their first 3 years. He kissed Natasha's forehead, then Julia's, and whispered, "Sweet dreams, butterflies." But as Stella moved to turn off the light, Julia's voice stopped her. "Daddy Carl, can you stay until I fall asleep?" The room went still. This was Julia's deepest fear, being alone in the dark, abandoned by everyone who promised to stay. Carl looked at Stella, silently asking permission. "Okay," Stella whispered, "just until she's asleep." She retreated to the kitchen, giving them space. But she could hear Carl's low voice through the thin walls, telling Julia about constellations, about how even in the dark there are tiny lights watching over us, about how he'd never be far away. 20 minutes later, he emerged, carefully closing the door behind him. His eyes were red. "She fell asleep holding my hand," he said, his voice thick. "She made me promise I'd be here when she woke up." "Carl, I know you don't want me making promises I can't keep. But Stella, I meant it. I'll be here. Tomorrow morning, tomorrow night, whenever she needs me." He ran a hand through his hair. "I've missed so much. The first time Natasha struggled to breathe and you had to rush her to the ER. The first time Julia woke up screaming from nightmares and you were the only one there to hold her. I can't give you back those moments. But I can be here for every single one that comes next." Stella's carefully constructed walls trembled. "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why now? Why do you care so much now when 3 years ago, you just believed them?" Carl's voice cracked. "I believed my parents when they said you'd chosen to end the pregnancy. I believed them when they said it was handled. I believed them because believing was easier than fighting, easier than standing up to them, easier than risking everything for love." He moved closer, not touching, but close enough that Stella could feel the warmth radiating from him. I was a coward, Stella. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. You can't make up for it, she whispered. Those years are gone. The nights I sat alone in emergency rooms. The times I chose between medication and groceries. The moments when I was so tired I could barely stand but had to keep going because no one else would. I know. Tears streamed down Carl's face. I know. And I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry you had to be strong enough for all three of you. I'm sorry I let people who claimed to love me destroy the people I actually loved. His voice dropped to barely audible. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging for a chance to earn it. Stella's own tears fell freely now. I still have feelings for you. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. God help me, I never stopped. But I'm terrified, Carl. Because what if 6 months from now you wake up and realize this isn't what you signed up for? What if the reality of asthma treatments and night terrors and living in a cramped apartment isn't enough? What if you realize you don't want Messi, you don't want us? Stella. Carl's hands cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away tears. I don't want perfect. I spent my entire life chasing perfect image, perfect family, perfect empire, and it was hollow, empty, meaningless. His forehead touched hers. You and Natasha and Julia, you're real. You're messy and complicated and more beautiful than anything I've ever known, and I will never, ever choose anything else over you again. How can I believe that? She whispered. Because I'll prove it. Every single day. For as long as it takes. They stood like that, breathing the same air, neither quite ready to close the distance but unable to pull apart. Stella's heart hammered against her ribs. Carl's hands trembled where they touched her face. Carl, she breathed. Mama? Julia's voice cut through the moment like a bell. I'm thirsty. They jumped apart, both breathing hard, both flushed. Stella pressed her hands to her hot cheeks and let out a shaky laugh. Coming, baby, she called. Carl cleared his throat, his own face red. I should probably stay. The word came out before Stella could stop it. Stay until she falls back asleep, please. Their eyes met, and something shifted, not fully healed, not completely trusted, but moving in the right direction. Always, Carl whispered. And for the first time in 3 years, Stella let herself believe it might be true. Vulnerability, real, honest vulnerability, is terrifying, isn't it? Admitting you still love someone who hurt you. Asking for forgiveness when you know you don't deserve it. Opening your heart when every instinct screams to protect yourself. But it's also the only way forward. Some of you watching this know exactly what that feels like. You've been where Stella is afraid to hope, afraid to trust again. Or maybe you've been where Carl is desperate to prove you've changed, knowing words aren't enough. If this story is hitting close to home, if you're navigating your own complicated journey toward forgiveness or redemption, you're not alone. Leave a comment, tell your story. This community is here for you. And hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, messy love, and families built from broken pieces. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday, 3 blocks from Stella's apartment building. A modest 2-bedroom bungalow with a postage stamp yard and shutters that needed painting. Nothing like the Barry estate. Nothing like the penthouse Carl had lived in for years. Perfect. He called Stella before making an offer. Not to ask permission, he was learning that respect meant informing, not controlling, but to make sure she didn't feel cornered. 3 blocks away? Her voice was careful, measured. That's close. Too close? Carl's heart hammered. I can look elsewhere. I just thought for the girls. So I could be there for morning drop-offs, or if Natasha has an attack in the middle of the night, or if Julia needs. It's not too close, Stella interrupted softly. It's thoughtful. Just promise me, this isn't about. It's not about controlling you. Or inserting myself where I'm not wanted. It's about being available. Present. Dependable. He paused. And if I'm being honest, it's about not wanting to miss another bedtime story. Stella was quiet for a moment. Then, does it have a yard? A small one. Big enough for butterfly bushes, maybe. If someone wanted to plant them. Natasha would love that. I know. He bought the house that week. The changes came gradually, carefully. Carl started seeing a therapist, Dr. Michelle Park, who specialized in family trauma and didn't care that he used to be a billionaire. She made him unpack 3 decades of controlled behavior, parental manipulation, and the terrifying realization that he'd spent most of his life living someone else's script. "You're rewriting it now," Dr. Park said during their 4th session. "That takes courage." "It takes necessity," Carl corrected. "I can't be the father they need if I'm still the son my parents created." He restructured his remaining business interests, the smaller companies he'd built himself, separate from Barry legacy money, reduced his public profile, stopped attending galas and benefits where people wanted the Carl Barry who used to exist. He donated most of his wealth quietly, keeping only what he needed to live modestly and support his daughters. Money didn't matter anymore. Time did. The first time Natasha called him daddy, without the qualifier, no daddy Carl, just daddy, he was helping her zip up her jacket before preschool. "Daddy, can you fix my butterfly?" She held up a hair clip shaped like a monarch, one wing bent at an odd angle. Carl's hands froze on her zipper. "What did you call me?" "Daddy." She said it so casually, like it had always been his name, like those 3 years of absence had dissolved into something new. "Can you fix it?" His vision blurred. He carefully straightened the butterfly's wing, then pulled Natasha into a hug, so tight, she squeaked. "You're squishing me," she giggled. "Sorry, baby, sorry." He released her, swiping at his eyes. "Your butterfly's fixed." Julia appeared from the bathroom, toothpaste still on her chin. "Daddy, is Natasha ready? We're gonna be late." And just like that, he was daddy to both of them. Mabel witnessed it from the doorway, her eyes shimmering behind her glasses. Later, while the girls collected their backpacks, she pulled Carl aside. "They always knew something was missing," she said quietly. "Even before you showed up. Julia used to ask why other kids had daddies, and she didn't. Natasha would draw families with 4 people and refuse to explain who the 4th one was." Mabel squeezed his arm. "They were waiting for you, Carl. They just didn't know it." Carl couldn't speak around the lump in his throat, so he just nodded. The co-parenting rhythm developed naturally, like learning a language by immersion. Stella handled morning routines on weekdays because she knew the girls' preferences. Natasha liked her toast cut in triangles. Julia needed her socks to match perfectly, or she'd have a meltdown. Carl took over dinner prep because he discovered he was actually decent at making meals that disguised vegetables. They traded off bedtime depending on who was less exhausted. They texted constantly. Natasha's wheezing a little, gave her the rescue inhaler. Julia's teacher said she drew another storm picture. "Might be a rough night. They want mac and cheese again. 3rd time this week. Is that okay?" It felt like partnership, like family. One Saturday evening, after the twins were asleep and Mabel had returned to her apartment, Stella stood in Carl's small kitchen, their first time alone in his new house, and something inside her simply broke. She'd been holding it together for weeks, months, really, 3 years if she was honest. But watching Carl move through his modest home twins artwork already hung on the refrigerator, nebulizer on the counter beside his coffee maker, Julia's purple elephant tucked on the couch from her last visit, it overwhelmed her. "Hey." Carl looked up from washing dishes, concern flooding his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Stella's voice cracked. "That's the problem. Nothing's wrong, and I keep waiting for it to be. I keep waiting for you to realize this isn't what you wanted. That raising 3-year-olds is exhausting and messy and boring sometimes. That I come with baggage and trauma and trust issues that might never fully heal. I keep waiting for you to leave." "Stella." "But you don't leave." Tears streamed freely now. "You show up, every single time. You learned Natasha's medication schedule and Julia's nightmare triggers, and you bought a house with a yard for butterflies, and you call them your daughters without hesitation, and I don't know how to." She pressed her hands to her face. "I don't know how to believe this is real." Carl dried his hands and moved toward her slowly, giving her space to retreat if she needed. When she didn't, he gently pulled her hands away from her face. "It's real," he said. "Stella, look at me. All of this is the realest thing I've ever known." "How can you be sure?" "Because for the first time in my life, I chose it." He cupped her face tenderly. "Nobody arranged it. Nobody manipulated it. Nobody told me this was what Barry men do, or what the image requires. I chose you. I chose Natasha and Julia. I chose messy and exhausting and real." "Carl." He dropped to his knees in front of her, not in proposal, but in something deeper. A vow made at eye level with the truth. "Never again will anyone choose for me," he said, his voice breaking. "Not my parents, not business partners, not society's expectations. You and the girls, you are my choice. Always. Every single day, I will choose you. Even on the hard days. Even on the days when Julia has nightmares and Natasha can't breathe, and we're both so tired we can barely function. Especially on those days." Stella sobbed 3 years of held-back grief and fear, and exhausted hope pouring out all at once. "I loved you before," Carl continued, tears streaming down his own face. "But I love you more now, because now I know what love costs, what it requires, and Stella, you are worth everything." She pulled him up, and they held each other in his small kitchen, not kissing, not yet, just holding on like they'd both been drowning and finally found solid ground. A sound made them turn. Natasha and Julia stood in the hallway, matching butterfly pajamas and tousled hair, staring at their parents with wide eyes. "Why are you crying?" Julia whispered, concerned. "We're okay, baby," Stella managed. "We're just happy," Carl finished, opening his arms. "We're happy crying." The twins didn't need more explanation than that. They ran forward, wrapping small arms around both parents, creating a tangle of limbs and tears and love that felt like the opposite of broken. "Group hug," Natasha announced unnecessarily. "The very best kind," Carl murmured into his daughter's hair. And Stella, watching this man hold their children like they were his entire universe, watching her daughters wrap themselves around their father with complete trust, finally let herself believe. They were going to be okay. More than okay. They were going to be a family. The reunion didn't happen with fireworks or grand declarations. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in April, when Stella's landlord informed her the building was being sold and she had 60 days to find a new place. She stood in Carl's kitchen, their routine now, dinner prep, while the twins played, and simply said, "My building's being sold." Carl looked up from where he was cutting carrots into matchsticks, because Natasha insisted vegetables taste better when they're tiny. His hand stilled on the knife. "Move in with me," he said. Not a question, an offering. "Carl, not because you need to, not because I'm trying to control anything, but because we're already doing this, raising them together, eating meals together, falling asleep on my couch after bedtime stories." His voice softened. "The only difference would be that you'd actually get a good night's sleep in a real bed instead of that couch." Stella's heart hammered. "That's a big step. I know. And if you're not ready, I understand. But Stella, I'm ready. I've been ready since the moment I saw them at that community center. Since before that, probably. Since the day you told me you were pregnant 3 years ago, and I was too much of a coward to say yes then. The girls would have their own room, with space for all those butterfly drawings and Julia's stuffed animals and everything that makes it theirs." He set down the knife and moved closer. "And you would have your own space too. Your own room, if that's what you need. We can go as slow as you want. But please let me do this. Let me give you a home where you're not worried about rent or eviction notices, or whether the heat will work through winter." Stella looked at this man, who'd learned her daughter's medication schedules and their nightmare patterns, and how Natasha liked her toast cut. Who'd bought a house 3 blocks away just to be present. Who'd walked away from billions to kneel on a kitchen floor and promise forever. "Okay," she whispered, but slowly, intentionally. "However you want," Carl breathed. "Just say yes." Yes. The move happened over 3 weekends. The twins treated it like the world's best adventure, carrying their stuffed animals in solemn procession from the old apartment to Carl's house, their house now. Mabel supervised with tissues in her pocket and banana bread in her hands, crying happy tears while pretending she had allergies. By May, they were settled. By June, it felt like they'd always been there. And in September, preschool family day arrived. Stella had warned Carl it was chaotic parents crammed into tiny chairs, mediocre coffee in paper cups, children performing songs with more enthusiasm than accuracy. But Carl showed up in jeans and a t-shirt that said, "Butterfly Dad," a gift from Mabel, claiming a spot in the front row like he was attending the Met Gala. The twins spotted him immediately. Natasha waved so enthusiastically she nearly knocked over the girl beside her. Julia blew him a kiss with both hands. And when the music started, some complicated choreography involving butterfly wings made from tissue paper and wire, Carl was the loudest parent in the room. "That's my daughter," he shouted when Natasha hit her mark perfectly. "And that's my other daughter. Look at those butterflies." Other parents turned to stare. Carl didn't care. He pulled out his phone and recorded every second, tears streaming down his face as his daughters twirled and flapped their wings and forgot half the steps but did it with absolute joy. Stella sat beside him, watching this man make a complete fool of himself, and felt something settle deep in her chest. She'd never stopped loving him. Even through the anger and the betrayal and the 3 years of struggle, somewhere underneath it all, she'd never stopped. She just buried it under survival and self-protection and fear. But watching him cheer for Julia when she tripped over her own feet and kept dancing anyway, watching him wipe tears when Natasha took her bow, watching him love their daughters with shameless, public, ridiculous devotion. She didn't need to bury it anymore. After the performance, while the twins ran to the snack table with their classmates, Carl pulled Stella aside. "My parents sent a letter," he said quietly, "to my lawyer. They want to meet, to repair the family image, and reconnect with their grandchildren." Stella's blood went cold. "What did you say?" "I haven't responded yet. Wanted to talk to you first." He took her hands. "But Stella, my answer is no. It's always going to be no. They don't get to threaten you, manipulate me, and then waltz back in when it's convenient for their reputation. They're your parents. They're strangers who share my DNA." Carl's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "My family is you. Natasha. Julia. Mabel. If I'm being honest, that's it. That's everyone who matters. What if they try to let them try?" His jaw set with a fierceness Stella had only seen once before, when Natasha went missing at the market. "I will protect you, all of you, whatever it takes." He pulled out his phone and, right there in the preschool hallway surrounded by construction paper flowers and alphabet posters, typed a response to his lawyer. "Tell them no. Tell them I have a family, and they're not part of it. Any future contact will be treated as harassment." He hit send and pocketed the phone. Done. Stella's eyes burned. "Carl." "Daddy!" Natasha appeared, dragging Julia by the hand. Both girls had juice-stained mouths and glitter somehow in their hair. "Miss Rodriguez said we were the best butterflies." "You absolutely were," Carl agreed solemnly, crouching to their level. "I've never seen better butterflies in my entire life." Julia tugged his sleeve, her expression suddenly serious. "Daddy, are we staying together always?" The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Carl lifted both girls, one on each hip, even though they were getting heavy, even though his back would probably hurt later. He looked at Stella over their heads, his eyes asking permission for what he was about to promise. Stella nodded, tears already falling. "Forever," Carl said, his voice breaking. "All of us, always." "Even when we're old like Mabel?" Natasha asked. "Especially then. Even when we're grown-ups with our own kids?" Julia pressed. "Even then. I'm your daddy forever. Nothing changes that." The twins seemed satisfied with this answer. They wiggled down and ran back to their friends, leaving Carl and Stella standing in the hallway surrounded by other families packing up to leave. "Forever," Stella repeated softly. "That's a big promise. It's the only promise I want to make." Carl stepped closer, his hand cupping her cheek. "I love you, Stella. I loved you 3 years ago. I loved you when I didn't know where you were. I loved you when I found you again. And I will love you for every single day we have left." "I love you too," she whispered. "I never stopped, even when I wanted to, even when it hurt. Can I kiss you?" His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I've been wanting to for months, but it never felt like the right." Stella pulled him down and kissed him. It was slow, deep, earned through months of rebuilding trust and proving promises and choosing each other every single day. It tasted like coffee and tears and hope, and it was absolutely perfect. "EWWW," Natasha's voice broke through. "Mama and Daddy are kissing." Julia giggled. "That means they love each other." "I know that," Natasha said with 3-year-old authority. "But it's still gross." Carl and Stella broke apart, both laughing, both crying, both completely undone. Their daughters stood hand in hand, butterfly wings slightly crooked, juice stains on their shirts, glitter everywhere, watching their parents with expressions that said they'd known this was coming all along. "Come here, butterflies," Stella said, opening her arms. All four of them hugged in that preschool hallway, messy and imperfect and absolutely real. They'd been broken, all of them, by secrets and threats and years of absence and fear. But broken things can be mended. Not into what they were before that version was gone forever. Into something stronger, something earned, something chosen. A family built not from perfection, but from the courage to try again. As they walked out of the preschool together, Natasha on Carl's shoulders, Julia holding Stella's hand, all of them talking over each other about dinner plans and whether they could stop for ice cream, Stella looked at the life they were building. It wasn't the life she'd planned 3 years ago. It was better. Because it was real. Because it was chosen. Because every moment of it had been fought for and earned and protected. Forever, Carl mouthed to her over Natasha's head. Forever, Stella mouthed back. And for the first time in 3 years, she believed it with her whole heart. This is what second chances look like. Not perfect. Not erasing the past. But choosing to build something new from broken pieces. Choosing to show up. Choosing to fight for the people who matter. You've watched Carl and Stella's journey from loss to redemption, from separation to reunion, from broken to whole. And maybe you see pieces of your own story in theirs. Maybe you're the one who needs to forgive. Maybe you're the one asking for forgiveness. Maybe you're somewhere in between, trying to figure out if healing is even possible. Here's what I know. It takes time. It takes courage. It takes choosing love over fear. Every single day. If this story moved you, if you found hope in these broken pieces becoming beautiful again, I want you to know you're part of a community that believes in second chances. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with someone who needs to believe that broken families can be rebuilt. Comment below and tell us. What would you fight for? What would you choose if fear wasn't holding you back? Because your story matters, your journey matters, and you deserve the kind of love that chooses you every single day, no matter how messy it gets. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing. And remember, it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Some families are born, others are built piece by piece, choice by choice, promise by promise. This was the second kind, the better kind. The kind that knows exactly what it costs to love and chooses it anyway. Carl Berry walked away from billions and found everything that mattered in a cramped apartment with 2 3-year-olds who called him Daddy. Stella Warrick spent 3 years surviving alone and discovered that trust could be rebuilt, one bedtime story at a time. And Natasha and Julia, 2 little girls who should never have existed according to people who valued image over life, grew up knowing they were chosen, wanted, loved fiercely by parents who fought their way back to each other. Not every broken thing can be fixed. But some broken things, when mended with patience and truth and unwavering commitment, become stronger than they ever were whole. This was one of those things. This was family.